I listened to it in private residence, and he was convincing and significant speech. He speaks for a people who have shown remarkable courage and strength in the face of brutal aggression. Courage and strength that's inspired not only the Ukrainians, but the entire world. Putin is inflicting appalling devastation and horror on Ukraine, bombing apartment buildings, maternity wards, hospitals. I mean, it's god-awful. I was speaking about this with our commander behind me here, General Milley. I mean, it just is amazing. Yesterday, we saw reports that Russian forces were holding hundreds of doctors and patients hostage in the largest hospital in Mariupol. These are atrocities. They're an outrage to the world. And the world is united in our support for Ukraine and our determination to make Putin pay a very heavy price. America is leading this effort, together with our allies and partners, providing enormous levels of security and humanitarian assistance that we're adding to today, and we're going to continue to do more in the days and weeks ahead. We're crippling Putin's economy with punishing sanctions that's going to only grow more painful over time, with the entire NATO and EU behind us and many other countries. What's at stake here are the principles that the United States and the United Nations and across the world stand for. It's about freedom. It's about the right of people to determine their own future. It's about making sure Ukraine will never be a victory for Putin, no matter what advances he makes on the battlefield. The American people are answering President Zelensky's call for more help, more weapons for Ukraine to defend itself, more tools to fight Russian aggression. And that's what we're doing. In fact, we started our assistance to Ukraine before this war began, as they started to do exercises along the Ukrainian border, the Russians, starting in March of last year. We took the threat of Putin invading very seriously, and we acted on it. We sent Ukraine more security assistance last year, $650 million in weapons, including anti-air and anti-armor equipment, before the invasion, more than we had ever provided before. So when the invasion began, they already had in their hands the kinds of weapons they needed to counter Russian advances. And once the war started, we immediately rushed $350 million in additional aid to further address their needs. Hundreds of anti-air systems, thousands of anti-tank weapons, transport helicopters, armed patrol boats, and other high-mobility vehicles, radar systems that help track incoming artillery and unmanned drones, secure communications equipment and tactical gear, satellite imagery and analysis capacity. And it's clearly helped Ukraine inflict dramatic losses on Russian forces. On Saturday, my administration authorized another $200 million to keep a steady flow of weapons and ammunition moving to Ukraine. Now I'm once again using my presidential authority to activate an additional security assistance to continue to help Ukraine fend off Russia's assault, an additional $800 million in assistance. That brings the total of new U.S. security assistance to Ukraine to $1 billion just this week. These are direct transfers of equipment from our Department of Defense to the Ukrainian military to help them as they fight against this invasion. And I thank the Congress for appropriating these funds. This new package on its own is going to provide unprecedented assistance to Ukraine. It includes 800 anti-aircraft systems to make sure the Ukrainian military can continue to stop the planes and helicopters that have been attacking their people and to defend their Ukrainian airspace. And at the request of President Zelensky, we have identified and are helping Ukraine acquire additional longer-range anti-aircraft systems and the munitions for those systems. Our new assistance package also includes 9,000 anti-armor systems. These are portable, high accuracy shoulder-mounted missiles that the Ukrainian forces have been using with great effect to destroy invading tanks and armored vehicles. It'll include 7,000 small arms, machine guns, shotguns, grenade launchers to equip the Ukrainians, including the brave women and men who are defending their cities as civilians, and they're on the countryside as well. And as well as the ammunition, artillery, and mortar rounds to go with small arms, 20 million rounds in total, 20 million rounds. This will include drones, which demonstrates our commitment to sending our most cutting-edge systems to Ukraine for its defense. And we're not doing this alone. Our allies and partners have stepped up to provide significant shipments of security assistance and will continue to help facilitate these deliveries as well. The United States and our allies and partners are fully committed to surging weapons of assistance to the Ukrainians. And more will be coming as we source additional stocks of equipment that we're ready to transfer. Now I want to be honest with you. This could be a long and difficult battle, but the American people will be steadfast in our support of the people of Ukraine in the face of Putin's immoral, unethical attacks on civilian populations. We are united in our abhorrence of Putin's depraved onslaught, and we're going to continue to have their backs as they fight for their freedom, their democracy, their very survival. And we're going to give Ukraine the arms to fight and defend themselves through all the difficult days ahead. We're going to continue to mobilize humanitarian relief to support people within Ukraine and those who have been forced to flee Ukraine. In just the past few weeks, we provided $300 million of humanitarian assistance to the people in Ukraine and in neighboring countries. Tens of thousands of tons of food, water, medicine, and other basic supplies to support the people in need. Our experts on the ground in Poland and Moldova and other neighboring countries are there to make real-time assessments of the rapidly evolving crisis and get urgently needed humanitarian supplies to the people in need when they need it. And we will support Ukraine's economy with direct financial assistance as well. And together with our allies and partners, we will keep up the pressure on Putin's crumbling economy, isolating him on the global stage. That's our goal. Make Putin pay the price, weaken his position, while strengthening the hand of the Ukrainians on the battlefield and at the negotiating table. Together with our allies and partners, we're going to stay the course, and we'll do everything we can to push for and end this tragic, unnecessary war. This is a struggle that pits the appetites of an autocrat against humankind's desire to be free. And let there be no doubt, no uncertainty, no question. America stands with the forces of freedom. We always have and we always will. I want to thank you all and God bless you. And I'm going to walk over and sign this bill to allow the drawdown of those materials. And may God protect their young Ukrainians who are out there defending their country.
President Biden at the White House announcing additional military help for Ukraine just a short time after Ukraine's President Zelensky addressed the U.S. Congress, the American people, pleading for more help, pleading for a no-fly zone. The White House.
What I'm signing here.
Let's listen to the president here.
Is the delegation authority under Section 506A1 of the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961, translated into plain English, a total of $800 million in defense articles.
The president talking about $800 million in aid to Ukraine, military aid, saying $1 billion in just the last week. Again, I mentioned the no-fly zone there a moment ago. The White House saying no to that, along with NATO allies, saying it would bring us closer to possible conflict with Russia. Let's listen.
I'm not going to comment on that right now. I'm not going to comment on anything other than what I told you to say. Thank you.
Well, Mr. President, is a war criminal, sir. Mr. President, are you going to go to Poland? Mr. President,
correspondents in the room trying, but the president not taking questions today. He talked about anti-aircraft systems, anti-tank systems being sent, anti-armor. In addition, drones as well. This was all reporting that Cecilia Vega had provided us with earlier today. Let's go right to our chief White House correspondent because, Cecilia, the president talked about listening to this in the private residence. That's not something you often hear from a president on any issue, saying that this was a moving message from President Zelensky, and he thanked the Congress for supporting him in this effort to get more military aid to Ukraine right away.
And, David, I think this very much was a response to those pleas, if you will, that President Zelensky delivered here to Washington just a couple of hours ago. This was also a message from President Biden to the American people and to, frankly, anyone in the world who sees these horrific images that are playing out in front of us in Ukraine right now and wondering, where is America in all of this? If America is not sending in troops, if America is not going to release those MiGs that Poland and Ukraine had wanted released, what is America doing? So this is the president laying out exactly what the United States has been doing as it relates to humanitarian and military aid to Ukraine. And you said at the big top line number there, $1 billion in aid just this week alone, some $650 million in weapons. The last year before the invasion, you heard President Zelensky make a direct appeal to the United States for more of those anti-tank, more of those aircraft, surface-to-air missiles. President Biden saying that they, in fact, have delivered those, and they will continue to deliver more. 600 Stingers, 2,600 Javelin. Those are those anti-tank missiles that the United States didn't want to give to Ukraine initially. You see those numbers there, David. But in the wake of this conflict, they had given them. The concern early on was that giving weapons like this to Ukraine would signify a potential escalation to Russia. So the United States had hesitated to do that. David, you know this. There has been increasing criticism here in Washington, particularly from Republicans who have pushed this president to do more, to act faster, to act stronger, particularly when it comes to sending weapons to Ukraine. Mitch McConnell saying the last few hours, yesterday basically, that the United States, this White House, has been too slow to respond. So I think this is President Biden doing a little bit of politics here, saying we have been helping the American people. He said directly, David, are answering Ukraine's calls, and he lays out that list of weapons that have been sent in the last year.
Yes, Cecilia Vega at the White House. Cecilia, thank you. And as Cecilia mentioned there, not only additional aid and military help to Ukraine, but a messaging effort by the White House to remind not only this country, but the world what the U.S. has done so far. And we should point out that Ukraine's President Zelensky, in his appeal to the Congress and to the American people, also thanked President Biden for the help so far from the U.S. And from the West. I want to bring in Martha Raddatz, who is live inside Ukraine. She's in Lviv for us again. And Martha, you and I have been talking about this for quite some time now, this concern. Now that we have signposted for the world, the U.S., the additional military equipment, the help that's now on the way, how you then get that to the Ukrainian people without becoming potential targets for the Russians.
And you are a potential target. They've been very successful in getting the equipment into the country and to the front lines, but the Russians are watching this carefully, and the U.S. fears that the Russians will strike one of these convoys inside Ukraine and possibly in Poland. So that is a real danger and something they think about. As for that no-fly zone, of course, President Biden is not going to provide a no-fly zone, but a no-fly zone would not stop the war. In fact, the strike in western Ukraine, about an hour from where I am right now, was launched out of Russia. A no-fly zone would not stop that. They launched 30 cruise missiles from aircraft and hit a military training facility in western Ukraine. It would not stop that. These weapons that the U.S. is sending in, they believe, will truly help Ukraine in this fight. David.
Martha Raddatz, our thanks to you in that attack that Martha speaks of, just about 10 miles from the Poland border, right there on NATO's doorstep. I want to bring in Rachel Scott, who's live up on the Hill, for one last question on this before we go. And Rachel, you heard Cecilia point out that there have been Republicans on the Hill pushing the president to do more. What they are in concert on, though, is the no to the no-fly zone. This has become somewhat of a political debate, how quickly the help can get to Ukraine and how much more the president should be giving at this moment. It would appear the White House wanted to make it very clear this afternoon that we are stepping forward and quickly here.
Yes, David, but there is a growing urgency here on Capitol Hill for the U.S. and for Congress, frankly, to do even more. We're seeing bipartisan calls for tougher sanctions to deliver more lethal aid. But again, that no-fly zone, something that President Zelensky really emphasized in his address to Congress today, that is just a line that Congress is not willing to cross. Both Democrats and Republicans agree on that. Now, in just over an hour here, we will see House and Senate leadership receive a classified briefing on the situation. I'm told they plan to use that as a roadmap to help guide them on how to better address some of the requests that they're getting from President Zelensky. David?
Rachel Scott live on the Hill, and you're looking at images there just a moment ago of the standing ovation from U.S. lawmakers up on the Hill today when President Zelensky was finished with his address, not only to Congress, but of course to the American people, thanking the West, President Biden, for help, but them pleading for more as they continue to try to fend off Russian troops. Our coverage will continue on ABC News Live, abcnews.com, and I'll be back with the entire team you just saw here for World News Tonight later today. I'm David Muir in New York. We'll see you then. Good day.
our thanks to David. You are watching ABC News Live now, and our continuing coverage of President Biden addressing the nation on the war in Ukraine, saying the United States will continue to organize humanitarian aid for refugees fleeing the violence and announcing additional military help for Ukraine. Joining us now, top Republican on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Congressman Michael Mccaul of Texas. Mike, good to see you. First of all, your reaction to Biden.
Well, I'm glad he signed our package that we sent to him that provides $3 billion in lethal military assistance and also over $4 billion in humanitarian assistance. You know, I've been saying since last November that we need these weapons in sooner, but we are where we are. And President Zelensky gave a very compelling, powerful speech today, almost like the Winston Churchill of our time, showed a video of Ukraine before the invasion, where it was a beautiful country, beautiful cities, and after the invasion, where you're seeing this devastation in maternity hospitals being bombed, something only reminiscent of Nazi Germany, in my judgment. So what Zelensky needs are these lethal drones, these S-300 anti-aircraft batteries. And I was in Poland last weekend with our 82nd Airborne, watching this operation where we're moving the weapons in country, which is so important right now, because that's what they need to defend themselves. And they put up such a great fight.
And not only do they need new assistance like these anti-aircraft and anti-armor system, Congressman, but as you well know, the president is heading to Brussels next week. He also needs NATO allies. We all need the NATO allies right now to get on board and support what the president is doing. So what exactly does the president need to say to get more of NATO allies on board to help in this fight and provide weapons, support, whatever the needs are?
Well, nobody's unified NATO better than Mr. Putin. In fact, I've never seen NATO this unified. And I can tell you, we're working with our coalition forces, our allies, to get these weapons in country and encouraging those countries. I can't get into specifics, but they are going to be sending, in my judgment, this lethal aid. You know, as well, we help back order for them. So I believe you're going to see a united front on this. But, you know, time is of the essence here. They're surrounding Kyiv in the Ring of Steel, and they're going to start trying to take over the city probably in the next couple of days. It's very important we get the weapons to them now. And just finally, Kira, I mean, you know, the eyes of the world are watching. He said, the president, you're the leader of the world. You're the leader of peace. And history will judge us by our actions. What did we do after the bombing started? What did we do to stop the bombing in Ukraine? What did we do to stop this humanitarian crisis?
You know, you talk about President Zelensky's speech to all of you today. From what I understand, you couldn't even hear a pin drop in that room, Congressman, especially when he showed that video invoking 9/11 and Pearl Harbor and just pressing you with these parallels to the violence and destruction and death that you're seeing in Ukraine. And then he made a very passionate plea to all of you. Let's take a listen.
Is this a lot to ask for, to create a no-fly zone over Ukraine to save people? Is this too much to ask? Humanitarian no-fly zone, something that that Russia would not be able to terrorize our free cities.
Is it too much to ask?
I don't think so. I think we should be giving him everything he needs. Now, the no-fly zone would create a direct conflict between NATO and Russia, and it would put us into World War III. And that's something I don't think anybody really wants right now. But we can give them the weapons to create the no-fly zone, and that would be the S-300 anti-aircraft. The Stingers can hit helicopters, but the S-300 can hit the planes in the sky, the Air Force of Russia that are bombing these hospitals and destroying their way of life. I think it was so compelling, Kira, that I've never seen members of Congress, and some of you would never imagine, being tearing up, really in tears over what they saw. And the only comparison I have is my father's war, World War II, when Hitler invaded Poland, and that's what I saw at the border of Poland and Ukraine. It's the biggest invasion since that time. And I believe that there are so many parallels that we have to act now to defend them.
So let me follow up on something you just said. You would right now be in support of a no-fly zone.
No, I think a no-fly zone, again, would create a collision between NATO aircraft and Russian, which would then lead us into World War III. And that's something we're trying not to escalate to. But I believe that the weapons that are finally getting to them, that we probably should have given to them before the invasion.
Congressman, let me ask you then. Let me just ask you, because Senator Lindsey Graham came forward and said, if indeed Putin were to use chemical weapons, then we should absolutely supply the no-fly zone. Do you support that? Is that what it would take in order to make that decision?
Well, you just raised an excellent point, and that is, where are our red lines? I'm not hearing the president talk about red lines, and that would be, what if, as we are predicting, in some of the briefings I'm getting, they're a little bit frightening. What happens if Putin does use chemical weapons? He's already doing this false flag operation with the biolabs in Ukraine. What if he uses chemical weapons? What if he uses short range tactical nukes? It seems to me at that point, weapons of mass destruction cross the line, the red line, and that's a whole nother issue that we're going to have to really think about soon, because I think the chemical weapons very likely could happen.
Finally, with that said, you're already looking into war crimes. Your committee has been going through the evidence I see. So far, have you found enough to hold him accountable?
Yes. I memean, he's already in violation of the Geneva Convention, bombing a maternity hospital, bombing refugees on their way out of country. Just the most horrible images that we see every day. But if he uses chemical weapons, to me, that makes the case very airtight. And I think we should call upon the General Assembly at the UN to start the process towards an indictment. Putin wants to be remembered as the president who reclaimed the glory of the old empire. But in reality, he's going to be remembered as a war criminal. And I think that will deeply impact his psyche and those around him as well.
Congressman Mike Mccaul, sure appreciate your time today, and I definitely want to follow up for sure with regard to the war crimes. It's something we want to stay on top of as we move forward. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Kira. Thanks for having me.
All right. You bet. All right, let's bring in Chief Global Affairs Correspondent Martha Raddatz, Chief White House Correspondent Cecilia Vega, both of them listening to what the president had to say. Martha, let's start with you. In country, what do you make of the president's additional assistance to Ukraine?
This is clearly exactly what the White House and the Pentagon thinks that Ukraine needs at this point. You've talked about this with Representative Mccaul and all day about this, the no-fly zone that President Zelensky wants. That I think we're having audio problems. Kara, can you hear me? Okay, I'm sorry. I was told that I couldn't be heard. But these are obviously the weapons that the White House and the Pentagon believe that Ukraine needs. They do not believe they need a no-fly zone. And in fact, a no-fly zone really wouldn't end the war. Most of the strikes have been surface-to-surface missiles, long-range artillery, things such as that. And a no-fly zone wouldn't really stop anything like that, Kira.
All right, our Martha Raddatz, and I apologize for the technical difficulties there. I heard about half of what you said, but thanks for rolling with us in these conditions. Martha Raddatz, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Cecilia Vega at the White House, now our Chief White House Correspondent. Cecilia, I want to make sure I have comms with you. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you loud and clear, Kara.
Okay, very good. All right. So with regard to where is America within this conflict, you said that's exactly what Biden was trying to make clear, what this country has done to help support Ukrainians and what he plans to do moving forward, and that is starting with new assistance.
Yeah, and Kira, it's because of what you just heard with the congressman that you had on right before us. I mean, you've got these growing calls on Capitol Hill, particularly from Republicans, but really there is a lot of bipartisan support on this, pushing this White House to do more. We have seen time and time again calls on Congress to ban Russian oil imports, to stop normal trade relations with Russia that the White House has then acted on or sort of been pushed to act on. And so you're seeing these calls become increasingly more urgent and increasingly louder, but again, particularly with Republicans. And then you had this speech, this impassioned speech, this plea almost begging from Zelensky today to the Congress, naming Biden by name, thanking him, but naming him to be the leader of the world, the leader of peace, and making this direct appeal on this White House for more, to close that airspace, as Martha just said. But that is a done deal. It is case closed. The White House says they are not going to do that. The president says this would be World War III. It would essentially, and excuse me because we've got trucks here behind us now, it would essentially be shooting at Russians and the Russians shooting back at us. That is not the situation the White House wants to get in. But the White House has said that what Ukraine does need from their intelligence assessment are these surface-to-air missiles and these anti-tank missiles, and that is what they have delivered. 600 Stingers, 2,600 Javelins in the lead-up in recent weeks, 3 past weeks or so, I am told, but also more to come on that front. So the headline in terms of a dollar figure here, $1 billion just this week alone in aid going to Ukraine. The President Biden said the American people are answering Ukraine's call. So, Kira, clearly this is a message, a response to Zelensky, but also a message to Americans and anyone around the world who is seeing those horrific images there outside of Kyiv, around the country of Ukraine, and answering what America is doing. Well, here's the receipts, the president is essentially saying.
Our Cecilia Vega there at the White House. Cecilia, thank you so much. Let's take you now to Capitol Hill, where our Rachel Scott is standing by it. As you heard Cecilia say, Rachel, and as you well know, this speech by Zelensky to Congress, he received a standing ovation as he rolled that video, seeing the death and destruction in his country. You could not hear a pin drop in that room. Now the question is, what more will Congress do? What more will lawmakers do to help support Ukraine?
Yeah, and I would say that President Zelensky has been particularly effective in actually getting Congress to act. We saw that after he had a private phone call with members of Congress urging that ban on Russian oil. We saw the growing calls here from Democrats and Republicans and the pressure on the White House to actually do something about it and act, which President Biden eventually followed through and did so. Now, in light and just hours after President Zelensky delivers this address to Congress, receives that standing ovation, you have lawmakers wiping the tears away from their eyes, we are seeing a renewed sense of urgency here to do even more. Now, Congress has already provided nearly $14 billion in aid to Ukraine, but some are saying that there needs to be tougher sanctions now and that there needs to be more lethal aid provided. They're calling on the White House, especially Republicans, to do more and to do more quicker. Obviously, the president today responding very swiftly, especially in the light of this address from President Zelensky. And happening right now, in just 30 minutes, we will see House and Senate members receive a classified briefing about the situation and the war in Ukraine. I'm told that they're expected to use that as a roadmap to help guide their decisions when it comes to trying to figure out how best to respond to some of the requests from President Zelensky. Kira?
Rachel Scott, thank you so much. And for more, let's bring in former senior Pentagon official Wendy Anderson, ABC News foreign correspondent Maggie Rulli, who is in Ukraine, also White House correspondent Mary Alice Parks, and ABC News national security and defense analyst Mick Mulroy. In addition, we have Alex Pichet, also here in D.C., Victor Akendo, and also our ABC News national security and defense analyst, as we mentioned, Mick Mulroy. Boy, that's a lot of people. Didn't realize we had a full $5 here, guys. I appreciate it so much. I don't know how we got so lucky. Maggie, let's start with you and just talk about what the impact of all of this new aid will have there in Ukraine while you are there on the ground, witnessing exactly what we saw in that video that Zelensky showed Congress. Every single day you are witnessing what he wanted everybody here back home to see in a very, very descript and horrific way.
Yeah, Kira, I think for me that video stood out during his speech. It was so powerful, graphic at times. I mean, if he wanted to just show people the emotion of what is happening here on the ground, I think he accomplished it. You know, it's one thing to hear stats and to even watch videos online, but when you're here and you're meeting the people that are affected, I mean, here in Lviv, hundreds of thousands of refugees pass through the city now every day. We've spoken to so many of them, people that have lost everything, families torn apart, couples that have had to kiss, maybe saying goodbye for the last time. we met one mother whose husband, son, and daughter-in-law are all serving in the army here now in Ukraine. I mean, these are sacrifices that are unimaginable. And so to come to Congress with that video, when he's asking for all of this military aid, he's also doing it with emotion. And we've heard time and time again today that so often wars aren't won on the battlefield, they're won at the negotiation table. And in this war in particular, I think emotion is what's going to get there. And he knew that he had to turn hearts and minds in Congress. And I feel like especially with that video, he could have done that today, Kira.
Wendy, Zelensky requested more anti-aircraft weapons, like the S-300 missile systems. And it looks like, according to Biden now, he will get 800 additional anti-aircraft plus 9,000 anti-armor systems. Let's talk about the impact of all these systems and what it involves and why that is so important at this moment in time.
Kira, the air dominance question and everything that Zelensky has requested in terms of air defense systems is one of the most important right now of this conflict. Here's the interesting thing. The Russians still, on day 21, do not have air superiority. They do not control the Ukrainian skies. It's a stunning achievement. We've seen that the Russians are doing very well for a number of reasons against the Russians. One thing I wanted to bring up is this distraction, I think, of the MiG-29s. It's a really important piece of the air dominance equation. But I think what Ukraine really needs more than anything, in which the president is trying to be responsive to President Zelensky on, are ground-based air defense systems, surface-to-air missiles known as SAMs, especially the kind with medium or greater altitude engagement capabilities. You referenced the S-300. That is one Soviet-made, ironically, weapon that apparently is either already in country or is moving to country. SA-14s, SA-8s are others that are presumably coming from NATO countries that have them, Bulgaria, Slovenia, maybe others. Two important questions. The Ukrainians are trained on these, right? So we need to make sure that we're sending in weaponry that the Ukrainians know how to use. And second, we need to make sure that we're actually countering an effective response to the Russians. And these particular weapons with this sort of medium and higher altitude engagement capability allows us to do that.
Victor, you have been following the exodus of the Ukrainians fleeing this violence. Many of them not sure if they'll ever even be allowed to return home. Update us from Poland.
Well, Kira, here in Poland, we are quickly to 2 million refugees total, with the majority of them coming here where we are, which is Warsaw. No city in Europe has accepted more refugees than Warsaw, many of them coming right through these doors of Warsaw Central Station. We are just outside where you can see that they have all of these tents that have been set up. They're filled with a bunch of different stuff. On one side, you've got some donations. There's baby products in that far tent. There's food and water on this other one here. And then there are also these buses, which we should mention, because this is really just a quick stopping point for the refugees as they come out of the train station. They'll then, if they need to, board these buses and go to a large shelter that's not too far away from here, which we visited. Some 8,000 refugees are being housed there. We had a chance to speak with Warsaw's mayor earlier today, and he made it clear any Ukrainian refugee who comes across the border into Poland in need of help will get it, but he is done with the improvisation. He wants to see a better plan in place to help relocate these refugees to help ease the burden on Poland. Kira?
All right, Victor, let's move to Alex now and talk about Congress today. Listening to Zelensky's call for aid, they gave him a standing ovation, but are they going to give him what he wants, Alex?
Well, I think they're going to give him part of what he wants. Certainly, we're hearing more and more from notably Republicans about aid that the Ukrainians need. It's something that Minority Leader Mitch McConnell has been very vocal about today, basically accusing the Biden administration of being sluggish, if you will, in its response. We know that, as Cecilia was mentioning earlier, even whenever it came to certain sanctions like on Russian oil and gas, it was something that was a bipartisan effort in Congress before the Biden administration had adopted it. Certainly the president laying out this additional aid that's going to be going to the Ukrainians. But I think, as Rachel had brought up, they have these closed-door meetings, the House meeting in about 30 minutes. The Senate will have another closed-door meeting later on this afternoon. And I think from that we'll hear a little bit more as to what the congressional appetite is for some of these requests that have been made by President Zelensky.
Meanwhile, Mary Alice, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met with his Russian counterpart in the first high-level talks between the U.S. and Russia since the invasion began. Tell us the significance of that and why now?
Yeah, I think that there's growing concern that the U.S. needs to be more actively involved. Like Cecilia was saying, the world wants to know what the U.S. is doing. When the world is seeing these images that are just so horrible, when the attacks are getting more deadly and more just impossible to stomach, the world is wondering what role the U.S. is playing and what the leadership role should be. It's one thing to talk about weapons. It's another to know if the U.S. can actually get these weapons into Ukraine. It's one thing to talk about helping Ukraine fight back. It's another to talk about when this will actually end. So I think the United States is feeling that pressure to make sure that they are continuing to bring parties to the negotiating table. They know that that is hard to do, but at some point, the question is, where does this stop?
All right, and Mick, finally, the International Court of Justice ordering Russia to immediately suspend military operations in Ukraine. Is there any chance that Russia will obey? And what, if any, consequences could Putin face if he declines?
Well, Kara, the way I look at this, it's essentially a series of war crimes that's masquerading as a military operation. And I think we need to do everything we can to publicly identify the military officers that are in charge of this campaign and have the ICC conduct an investigation. And if they're found responsible and if they're convicted in absentia, we should not remove the sanctions until they turn them over. This is essentially a crime against humanity, and we're witnessing it real time.
And we are going to watch it in real time and stay on it. You heard Mike Mccaul, a congressman from Texas, say just moments ago that they are on top of this, collecting the evidence, and already they have the proof that that they need to pursue those war crimes against Putin. So we shall see. It'll be a long haul. Our team coverage of Biden's speech and the events in Ukraine. Thank you all for joining us. Appreciate you being a part of our special coverage. And coming up, high risks and refugees, women and children leaving or being left alone, and they're left the most vulnerable. We'll discuss it next.